Alright, this is Pen Tool Part 3. So here our file is the exact spot where we left off in Pen Tool Part 2, illustrating this skull. So now let's talk about some more interesting forms that we can get using the Pathfinder. Okay, if I take a look over at my layers, you can see that last time I moved the skull image so it was effectively on top of all of these illustrations. And the benefit there is that I can fill my graphics with color, and then I can toggle on and off the visibility by poking these little eyes out. So I can see, yeah, it's looking like I'm capturing something, or I don't know, maybe the nose is looking a little too general and cartoonish, so I can get in there and tighten that up, add a couple points, or whatever. Oh, since I mentioned it, why don't we just go ahead and do that? So you see what I'm talking about right here, how the nose, it's a little bit too smooth, and it kind of appears to me like somebody isn't drawing a specific skull, they're just kind of drawing a skull in general. So I'll click over here on the right, like I told you last time, that selects the skull, or rather the paths that make up the nose. And zoom in. If I hit A for white arrow, you see how all of these anchors are filled in solid? If I want to address just one in particular, sometimes you need to click off and then back on again, and you'll get that little cue. And then here I can start to see the tangent handles I can work with and so forth. So I don't think I even really need to look at the picture for this. I think if I just get a little more sort of a little more of a bend in here, this will start to look a little more specific, right? And just give us that sense. So this is sort of an artist cheat. Now, if I wanted to go even further, I could also decide to add points or subtract points from this path. And that can actually be done just from the pen itself. As the pen approaches a path that's selected, so we've used the white arrow, we can actually see the path edge. As I approach that path, you'll see I'll get a little negative on my pen, and if I click there, it removes the path, and then the rest of the path, it removes the anchor, and then the rest of the path updates to keep that shape intact and closed. So let me hit undo. You can do the same thing too as you approach a selected path, and you get a plus if you're on an area that has no anchor. So if I click there, it's going to give me this path. It's a little hard to make out because it also had to add some tangency handles to sort of preserve that shape. But now I give myself one more opportunity to have a bend, whereas before I had a much broader sort of smooth line. So P for pen, or use the arrow first to select the path, and as the pen tool approaches an area, it's context sensitive. So if there's no anchor to be found, it'll offer you to make one, and if there is an anchor, it will offer to take it away. Okay, great. So let's say we want to get in here and start to give this thing more of a sense of depth. Right now it's just super, super flat. And in order to do that, I'm going to pull my skull back down to the bottom. That's the image. And I'm going to hide everything except for, say, the right eye. Not very useful because the skull was hidden and the right eye is solid white. I'll select the right eye, come back over here, and flip it around, and I guess white is fine for now. And that'll give me a sense. You know what, let's do this with the left eye, because I think I did a better job. The left eye. Looks like it won't select until you've made it visible. And again, flip it so it's stroke and not fill. So let's say that we want to illustrate the furthest point back in the skull, which would be that little item right there, that kind of slot where your optic nerve travels through. So I'll zoom in, and then I'm going to start well outside of that closed form with the pen and make a single point, and then I'll kind of come up here and sort of add some curves as I go, express that channel. And I just want to make sure that A, this thing is closed, and B, it well exceeds that edge where those two visual areas overlap. Okay, now I hit V, which is the black arrow, and I'm going to select the larger of the two objects, the sort of the background object. And I'll go up here to Edit and say Copy, and then this is a special one, which is Paste in Place. So you can't see any change, and that's because we have two copies of that big circular shape, and I'll show you why. One of them is going to get partially deleted. Now I deselected everything to make sure that I'm kind of starting from a clean slate. I click here, that'll only select one of those shapes, because there are two there, and then I'll hold Shift, and I'll select this guy as well, Sometimes it's hard to hit that stuff just right. So you can see these two forms are now selected. Now, here's the magical part. Let's go to Window and let's go to Pathfinder. And Pathfinder, it's really hard to describe these things. So they come with all these, it's basically little shapes that are overlapping in different ways. And you want them to result in different, they're sort of like math equations if you think about it. So in one case you might add two shapes together. In another case you subtract shapes from one another. All that we're interested in is the place where these two forms intersect. It's that third one on the top. So you'll see here how we can see the path lines, right? The center lines that make up the paths. They're both selected. I hit this one which is called intersect. And it would appear that not much has happened, but remember we sort of deleted one of the copies of this shape that we made. But see, this guy now, he's been carved so he meets exactly where he needs to be. Okay, so I'll show you why this is cool. I'm going to flop this guy so I'm working with his fill color. I'll make that black. And then if I click out here and make this guy all fill as well, well, let's see. I need to make it non-white to really show you what took place here. So let's do a light gray. Now if I hide my background image, I can see that I've made this nice little illustration where both these guys cut off at the exact same moment. If you're using contour lines and making a sort of cartoonish drawing, it's one thing, but it's really hard to get this kind of fidelity if you have to illustrate that line twice to hit them right on the head. So Pathfinder is definitely the way to make this happen. Just real quick, I'll do one more shape so that we can really see how this starts to give a sense of depth. So I'll flop this guy so he's back to outlines, and then I'll grab the pen again, and I want to capture this sort of shaded area. Oops. And your color choice is going to make a big difference here too. I find a lot of students often use colors that are too far apart. So I'll show you some of the tricks we can do there. Okay, so again, all of the area where this shape that I'm making, this sort of imaginary shape, is exceeding that boundary. I've just made it clearly exceed the boundary instead of trying to draw them real close together. I also want to type V for black arrow, click on this guy, and go to Object, or rather Copy, which is under Edit, and paste in place. Click over here to deselect, which might be an extra step. Reselect that, select that, and we just keep the intersection. We want to flop those colors, maybe make this slightly darker gray. I have a distinct set of colors right here because I have only web colors checked, so it's totally up to you. I'll tell you why I do it, but it's a long story. Okay, so finally, let's restore this eye socket to fill as well. That's looking pretty good, but you can see that the last thing we need to do is to improve this layer hierarchy. So even though it's sort of the furthest back in space, visually we need this guy to be on top of the stack, or else he's going to be covered up by his buddies. And so we get something like that. Now if I hide the skull image and zoom back out, it doesn't look like too much yet, but if I were to add in more layers and be a little more careful about the distinctions between colors, you'll see that I don't need gradients or any of those tricks to give the appearance of volume. And in fact, if you know how to use gradients, please do not use them. They're so hard to do without the image just looking super computery, and we're hoping to get somewhere where we get a really, really tight image that is an illustration that's not necessarily just an obvious Illustrator or Photoshop job.